investigation into the disappearance of Susan Powell formally began on the morning of December 7th, 2009. The timeline of the inquiry was triggered not by a forensic discovery, but by a disruption in established routine. At approximately 9:50 in the morning, Debbie Caldwell, a daycare provider in West Valley City, Utah, noted the absence of Charlie and Braden Powell. Their mother, Susan, had not arrived to drop them off, nor had she contacted the facility to report a change in schedule. This administrative anomaly prompted Caldwell to initiate a series of phone calls that would eventually involve law enforcement. Caldwell attempted to reach Susan on her cellular device, and at her place of employment, Wells Fargo Financial. Neither attempt was successful. She then contacted Josh Powell, Susan's husband, leaving a voicemail. By 10 in the morning, with no response from either parent, Caldwell contacted Josh's mother and sister. The inability to locate the family unit led Susan's friend, Kiesi Helwell, to report the family missing to the West Valley City Police Department. At this point in the timeline, the case was classified as a welfare check. Officers were dispatched to the residence located on Sarah Circle. According to the initial incident report, the house was locked. Investigators noted that the family vehicle, a blue 2005 Chrysler Town and Country minivan, was absent from the driveway. Visual inspection through the windows revealed no signs of forced entry or a struggle within the visible living areas. However, officers documented immediate anomalies in the living area. 2 box fans were positioned on the floor, powered on and directed at the living room sofa. Fearing carbon monoxide poisoning or a similar domestic hazard, officers made the decision to breach the residence. Records indicate that an officer broke a glass pane on a rear window to gain entry. Upon entry, the house was empty. Law enforcement records indicate that while the environment was generally orderly, specific environmental details were documented. The fans observed from the exterior were blowing air directly onto a section of the carpet near the sofa. When officers touched the upholstery, they noted the fabric was damp, suggesting recent cleaning or saturation. Beside the sofa, the rug appeared undisturbed, yet the focused airflow indicated a specific attempt to dry that particular piece of furniture. Further examination of the residence yielded items that contradicted the theory of a planned family departure. Susan's purse, containing her identification, credit cards, and cash, was located inside the home. In missing person protocols, the presence of a purse and wallet is statistically significant, often elevating a case from a voluntary disappearance to a critical missing person investigation. To understand the context of the hours preceding the discovery, Investigators began reconstructing the timeline of December 6th, the day prior to the report. Witness statements helped reconstruct Susan's final verified movements. On Sunday morning, meteorological records for West Valley City indicate that the temperature held steady near freezing, with overcast skies. Susan attended church services with her 2 young sons, Charlie and Braden. Her husband, Josh Powell, did not accompany them. Upon returning to the residence, Susan prepared a pancake brunch. A neighbor and friend, Giovanna Owings, arrived at the home shortly after noon. During later interviews with investigators, Owings stated that the atmosphere in the home appeared normal, though she noted that Josh Powell seemed occupied with tasks unrelated to the social gathering. Owings remained at the residence until approximately 5 in the afternoon. At the time of her departure, records show that Susan was tired, but in good spirits. She complained of feeling unwell and laid down on the couch, the same couch where the fans would later be found drying the fabric. This marks the final independent verification of Susan Powell's presence at the Sarah Circle address. The procedural shift from a missing family case to a missing person investigation occurred later that afternoon on December 7th. At approximately 5 in the afternoon, the lead detective on the case received a notification that Josh Powell had returned to the area with the 2 children. While investigators were present at the Sarah Circle address, the family minivan turned onto the street. According to the incident report, Detective Ellis approached the vehicle. He noted that Josh appeared calm. When asked about his whereabouts, Josh stated that he had taken his sons, aged 2 and 4, on a camping trip. He claimed they had departed the residence around 12:30 in the morning on December 7th to visit Simpson Springs, a remote area in Utah's West Desert. Investigators immediately cross-referenced this statement with meteorological data. Weather reports for the night of December 6th and the early morning of December 7th indicated a severe winter storm warning. Temperatures in the West Desert were recorded well below freezing, and significant snow accumulation had occurred. Procedural logic dictated that taking toddlers camping in such conditions was highly irregular. Furthermore, officers noted that Josh appeared surprised to learn that it was Monday. He claimed to believe it was Sunday, offering this as the reason for his failure to report to work or drop the children at daycare. Josh was invited to the police station for an interview, while the children were placed in the temporary care of relatives. The initial interview, recorded on video, provides a granular look at the subject's demeanor. Josh claimed that when he departed the home shortly after midnight, Susan was alive and sleeping on the couch. This statement established the last alleged sighting of Susan by her husband. However, when informed by Detective Lutz that Susan was missing and had not shown up for work. Josh's reaction was described in the file as muted. He did not ask questions regarding where she might be, nor did he display the physiological markers of distress typically observed in spouses of missing persons. Simultaneous to the interview, forensic analysis of Josh Powell's minivan became a priority. A search warrant was executed and the vehicle was processed. The inventory of the van's contents provided tangible evidence that complicated Josh's narrative. Inside the vehicle, officers found a generator, gas cans, tarps, and tools including a rake and shovel. While these items could be consistent with a camping trip, investigators noted the absence of typical cold weather camping gear suitable for small children. Crucially, investigators located a cellular phone in the center console. It was Susan's phone. Josh initially claimed he did not know where her phone was, but its discovery in his vehicle directly contradicted his earlier lack of knowledge. Additionally, officers located a Rug Dr. carpet cleaner inside the van. The presence of the carpet cleaner correlated with the damp sofa observed by the initial responding officers. When questioned about the fans and the wet couch, Josh claimed he had cleaned the couch days prior. This statement conflicted with the tactile evidence gathered at the scene, which indicated the moisture was fresh, and the witness statement from Joe Vanna Owings, who confirmed the couch was dry and the fans were absent at 5 in the afternoon on Sunday. Digital forensics would soon provide a competing timeline to the one offered by the subject. Investigators analyzed the SIM card from Susan's phone. The data indicated that the phone had been used, or at least was powered on, during the time Josh claimed to be driving to the desert. However, the most critical digital evidence came from Josh's own device. Cellular tower triangulation data was pulled for the night of December 6th and the day of December 7th. The records showed that Josh's phone traveled west, away from West Valley City. However, there was a significant gap in the data where the device appeared to be turned off or in an area with no reception. When the signal reacquired, the timestamps did not perfectly align with the travel times required for a trip to Simpson Springs and back. Given the weather conditions, investigators noted a gap in Josh's timeline between his return from the desert and his arrival at the house where police were waiting. This gap, approximately 45 minutes to an hour, remained unaccounted for. To understand the context of that weekend, investigators began pulling records related to the Powell marriage and financial status. The doctrine of evidence requires looking at the documented stressors within the household. Financial audits revealed that the couple was carrying over $200,000 in debt. Bankruptcy filings had been initiated. Such economic pressure is a statistically significant factor in domestic incidents. Susan's digital footprint provided a more granular view of the domestic environment. Investigators accessed emails and messages sent from Susan to her friends and family in the year leading up to her disappearance. These communications outlined a pattern of controlling behavior exhibited by Josh. In emails dated from 2008, Susan described strict limitations placed on her access to funds and transportation. She documented instances where Josh would ration food or dictate her schedule. One specific piece of evidence, recovered later in the investigation, served as a grim anchor for the context of the case. Susan had rented a safe deposit box at a bank, unbeknownst to her husband. Inside, she placed a handwritten letter titled simply, "Last Will and Testament of Susan Powell." The document was not a standard legal will, but rather a statement of intent and fear. In the text, Susan wrote that if she were to perish, it may not be an accident, even if it appeared to be one. She explicitly named her husband as the source of this fear. This document, once entered into the case file, shifted the investigative perspective from a disappearance to a potential criminal matter. Procedural errors and jurisdictional friction began to surface during the initial phase. On December 9th, Josh Powell formally retained legal counsel and ceased cooperation with the West Valley City Police Department. This invocation of rights halted the direct questioning of the primary person of interest. Investigators were forced to rely on circumstantial evidence and external data points rather than admission. On December 8th, investigators executed a secondary search warrant on the Sarah Circle residence. The forensic team utilized alternate light sources and chemical reagents to detect the presence of biological fluids. While the carpet cleaner had been used, trace analysis was conducted on the subflooring and the fibers of the sofa. The results of these initial tests were inconclusive regarding the presence of significant biological evidence in the main living area, suggesting that if a fatal incident occurred there, the cleanup had been thorough. Teams of volunteers and officers began combing the West Desert, focusing on the Simpson Springs area Josh had identified. They looked for disturbed earth, scattered items, or any sign of the individual. However, the vastness of the terrain and the heavy snowfall from the night of the incident severely hampered these efforts. The doctrine of evidence in this case relied heavily on what was missing, the gaps in the digital record, the absence of a credible alibi, and the silence of the only adult witness who had returned from the desert. The search of the residence yielded more disturbing context regarding the internal dynamics of the family. Journals kept by Susan detailed a marriage in rapid decline. She wrote about Josh's increasing interest in the grim details of other fatal incidents in the news. She noted his erratic sleep schedules and his obsession with their financial ruin. Simultaneously, the investigation expanded to include Josh's father, Steve Powell. By mid-December, Josh Powell relocated from Utah to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father. This move complicated the procedural flow, requiring coordination between West Valley City Police and law enforcement agencies in Pierce County, Washington. While Steve Powell was not initially placed at the Sarah Circle residence on the night of the disappearance, records indicated a complex and inappropriate obsession he held regarding his daughter-in-law. Journals and video files recovered from the Powell family network verified that Steve had been documenting Susan without her consent for years. This added a layer of complexity to the motive, although the primary focus remained on the timeline involving Josh and the minivan. In the months following the disappearance, the procedural strategy shifted from a rescue operation to a criminal inquiry aimed at building a circumstantial case. Investigators scrutinized the mileage on a rental car Josh used shortly after the police seized his minivan. Records showed he put hundreds of miles on the rental vehicle within 24 hours. This radius became a new search perimeter, extending the investigation into Nevada and Oregon. But the sheer scale of the area diluted the effectiveness of the search. The forensic analysis of the minivan continued to yield granular data. Traces of drywall and concrete were found in the vehicle, inconsistent with a camping trip, but consistent with construction or disposal activities. Furthermore, a specific type of wire was found in the van, which matched wire found at the Powell residence. While these items were cataloged as evidence, the prosecution team determined they were insufficient to secure a conviction. Without a central piece of physical evidence linking the subject directly to a fatal act. By 2011, the investigation had become largely administrative, characterized by a series of electronic warrants and the analysis of digital artifacts. On August 25, 2011, authorities executed a search warrant at the residence in Puyallup, where the subject and his children were living with his father. During this search, detectives uncovered evidence of a separate nature involving the subject's father. According to the arrest report, thousands of illicit images were discovered on hard drives seized from the home, documenting voyeuristic activities involving neighboring residents. This discovery triggered immediate intervention by the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. State records indicate that on that same day, the two children, aged 7 and 5, were removed from the custody of their father and grandfather. The state argued that the environment was unsafe due to the nature of the material found in the home. The legal custody of the children was temporarily awarded to the parents of the missing woman, who also resided in Washington. This transfer of custody marked the beginning of a rigorous legal process involving psychological evaluations and supervised visitation schedules. Court transcripts from the ensuing dependency hearings reveal a deteriorating psychological profile of the subject. Evaluators appointed by the court noted his rigid defensiveness and lack of empathy. Despite these assessments, the family court structure aimed for reunification, a standard procedural goal in dependency cases. The court ordered supervised visits between the subject and his sons. These interactions were strictly monitored and documented by contracted social workers. In late 2011, the subject secured a rental property in Graham, Washington, separate from his father's residence. This move was a prerequisite set by the court for him to potentially regain custody. However, largely unknown to the family court judge at the time, the subject was systematically divesting himself of possessions. Receipts recovered later indicated the purchase of heavy-duty distinct items and large quantities of fuel. The timeline of February 5th, 2012 is documented through dispatch logs, text messages, and the notes of the assigned visitation supervisor. The schedule dictated a supervised visit at the subject's rental home in Graham, commencing at 12 noon. At approximately 11:59, the social worker arrived at the residence with the two children. According to her statement provided to law enforcement later, the children ran ahead toward the front door. The subject opened the door, allowed the children to enter, and then physically blocked the social worker from crossing the threshold. He then closed and locked the door. At 12 noon, the social worker returned to her vehicle and noted the irregularity. She reported smelling the distinct odor of gasoline. At 12:31, the social worker placed a call to 911. The recording of this call reveals a significant procedural breakdown in the emergency response dispatch system. The operator questioned the social worker repeatedly regarding the nature of the emergency and the specific address, consuming critical minutes. The transcripts show the social worker stating clearly that she smelled gas and that the children were locked inside with a man whose children had been removed by the state. The classification of the call was not immediately elevated to the highest priority. A failure later cited in administrative reviews of the dispatch center's protocols. While the social worker was attempting to summon aid, digital forensics later recovered the subject's final outgoing communications. At 12:17, he sent emails to his attorney and family members. These messages contained instructions regarding his financial accounts and the disposal of his property, adhering to the structure of a last will and testament. The metadata confirms these messages were transmitted from a mobile device located within the residence. At 12:39, emergency responders were en route, but the delay proved consequential. Witnesses in the vicinity reported a massive explosion that destroyed the structure. Fire battalion logs record the time of the explosion and the subsequent fire that fully engulfed the rental home. When fire crews extinguished the blaze, the recovery process began. The medical examiner's report indicated that the subject and the two children were located in the center of the residence. The autopsies revealed that the children had sustained fatal injuries prior to the fire, indicating that the loss of life was not solely due to the conflagration. The manner of death for all three individuals was classified formally, confirming the intentional nature of the event. The subject's death was ruled self-inflicted. The aftermath of the event in Graham forced a comprehensive review of the entire investigative timeline. On February 8th, 2012, West Valley City Police announced that the subject of their investigation was deceased, technically closing the active inquiry into him as a person of interest. However, the status of the missing woman remained unchanged. Following the events of February 2012, the West Valley City Police Department faced immense public pressure to release the files related to the disappearance of the woman. In May 2013, the department unsealed the case file, releasing nearly 30,000 pages of documents, photographs, and video evidence to the public. These records provided a granular view of the procedural steps taken and the opportunities missed. The released files confirmed that investigators had identified significant discrepancies in the subject's alibi within 48 hours of the initial report. The doctrine of evidence in the file highlights the wiretap summaries, which captured the subject making disparaging remarks about his missing wife, but never explicitly admitting to a fatal act. The files also detailed the cryptographic efforts undertaken to access the subject's encrypted hard drives. Experts had spent years attempting to bypass the encryption on the digital devices seized from the Utah home, a process that yielded limited results due to the complexity of the security measures employed by the subject. One specific document within the released cache drew attention to a potential location of the missing woman. Analysis of the subject's vehicle GPS, combined with mineralogy reports from soil found on the undercarriage of the minivan, pointed to a specific geological profile consistent with the Topaz Mountain region in the Utah desert. Search logs indicate that teams were deployed to this area on multiple occasions. These canvases utilized ground-penetrating radar and cadence dogs, while animal bones and non-relevant items were recovered. The specific location of the missing individual was never identified. The administrative closure of the case by West Valley City did not equate to a resolution. The legal battles continued in the form of civil litigation. The parents of the missing woman filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the state of Washington, specifically the Department of Social and Health Services. The plaintiffs argued that the state failed in its duty of care by allowing the visitation on February 5th without adequate security measures. Given the known risk factors and the psychological profile of the subject, during the civil trial, evidence was presented regarding the systemic failures in communication between the Utah investigators and the Washington social workers. Testimony revealed that the full extent of the circumstantial evidence against the subject regarding his wife's disappearance had not been fully conveyed to the family court decision makers who authorized the visitation. The jury eventually found the state negligent, awarding a significant judgment to the family, though the verdict was later reduced on appeal due to statutory limitations. The timeline of the case essentially froze following the release of the case files. The status of the missing woman remains classified as a cold case. The tangible records, the unencrypted hard drives, the soil samples, and the interview transcripts remain in evidence storage. The investigation demonstrated the limitations of circumstantial evidence in securing criminal charges and the catastrophic consequences of jurisdictional disconnects in child welfare cases. The final entry in the primary investigative log notes that while the person responsible for the disappearance is believed to be the deceased subject, without the recovery of the individual, the legal requirements for a criminal prosecution can never be met, leaving the procedural loop permanently open.